Yo, what's going on, E7 fam? If you can't tell by this video's title as well as the waifu that is on your screen, we're going to be talking about something a little bit different here today on the channel. This is a subject that I am fairly passionate about and have talked about at length in my days as a card game content creator. I've touched on this topic briefly in my Old World Arena guides. For you longtime viewers, you probably may hear me say things that are very similar to what's in that video. I haven't really talked about this subject at length or in depth with my Epic 7 community. With the end of the current World Arena season fast approaching us in just a few weeks' time, as well as the fact that I just happened to win a casual charity tournament this past weekend, I figured there's not really a better time or stage for me to talk about this exact subject than now, so why not do it? Again, if you've looked at the video title, you probably already know that the subject of today's video is going to be what I like to call Learn to Get Good circa 1645, also known as the Book of Five Rings, written by Shinmen Musashi no Kami Fujiwara no Genshin, more commonly known to the average person as Miyamoto Musashi, and also more commonly depicted as a busty anime waifu nowadays because Fate is a weird franchise and has a stranglehold on almost every single historical figure nowadays. If you've never read this book, it is written in 1645 and is a relatively short read that details Musashi's Nitten Ichiryu fighting style. That is the two heavens as one style, a dual-wielding fighting style where he uses two katanas as opposed to one singular katana, and we will talk more about that later on in the video. The Book of Five Rings details Musashi's mindset on how he went an entire lifetime undefeated in combat, besting many of the greatest swordsmen of his era. The Book of Five Rings, naturally, is divided into 5 parts: the Book of Earth, the Book of Water, the Book of Fire, the Book of Wind, and the Book of Void. With the exception of the Book of Wind, almost all of these sections can be applied to competition and everyday life. Put into practice, I've used a lot of the same ideas in this book to win state-level championships and even land myself in top-cut spots for national-level tournaments. Many of the best players in almost every single game that I have been a part of employ the tactics that are found in this book, whether they realize it or not. I want to talk about these books and highlight some of the points from each of them so that you, the viewer, can apply them as a player, not to just Epic 7, but nearly every other competitive game that you play. Let's start with the Book of Earth. You've probably heard of the word foundation before, the underlying basis from which we build upon. The Book of Earth establishes the premise that one must have knowledge of all things to have a solid foundation. To quote Musashi, know the smallest things and the largest things, the shallowest things and the deepest things. In my How to Play series, I spend 3 to 7 minutes or so in each video teaching you, the viewer, the multipliers, and explaining what every skill a character does in great detail. And I don't do this for no reason. I assume that everyone watching my videos knows nothing. I'm essentially teaching you the foundation. I also do it because studying things is incredibly important. I know, for example, that Ilinav's Soulburn multiplier is 1.4x her attack with a 28% health scaling multiplier, which is far higher than most, if not all, other health scaling moves in this game. This is why I had confidence picking her into Apocalypse Ravi and risking my entire tournament life on her. I study the characters in this game. I research them, familiarize myself with them. I ask myself questions like, where is this hero best used? What type of strategy do they help me employ? How do these heroes interact with other popular heroes that I'm likely to see on ladder? If you know what every character in Epic 7 does, their applications, and how they are used, you can discern what strategies an opponent is going to employ against you on the fly. An opponent bans Edward Elric, for example, probably a control player, or they're looking to take the character Ran. Ban Bellion, probably an aggro player looking to first pick Spectre Tenebria, or take Conqueror Lilius with the option to pivot into Spectre Tenebria later on. What happens if my opponent picks Command Model Leica? Do I think that Leica is on Guiding Light? If she is, I should probably take Reamer Tempest while thinking of a way to contain Landy even if she's not already picked yet. If it's not on Guiding Light, or they've already taken Landy, What's the worst scenario? What possibly could happen to me in this situation? You should know the answer to these things at the highest level of play. The reason you study is to learn the applications and the interaction points. The more you study and the more scenarios you have experience with, the easier it is to produce a solution on the fly to a given problem that you are facing. To quote Musashi again, from one thing, know 10,000 things. When you attain the way of strategy, there will not be one thing that you cannot see. The Book of Water. Let's start with a quote from one of my favorite anime of all time, Cowboy Bebop. There's a famous line that the protagonist Spike Spiegel uses that is very reminiscent of a quote from the late and great Bruce Lee. The quote is as such: "You're tense, I'm calm. You apply excessive force, and I control that force through fluid motion. That means relaxing the whole body so it can react instantly without resistance. No, without thought. Do you see now? It means becoming like clear water. Water can take any form. It drifts without effort one moment, then pounds down in a torrent the very next." This quote, and the mindset it derives from, is most likely a derivative of Musashi's Book of Water, which primarily focuses on the subject of adaptability. Water is adaptive, flexible. It fills the container it is placed in, going with the path of least resistance. There's a reason my favorite t-shirt is the one from Broken Tier that talks about the options in a given format, about nerfs, buffs, patches, or adapting. And adapting is the only option that's not crossed out. In a game like Epic 7, you can think of the container that water is going into as the metagame that you are playing in. You want to take the path of least resistance to fill that container. If Spectre Tenebria is going to be a heavily first-picked character in a given format, you should adapt the style of playing an aggressive AoE cleaver or an aggro player in general, even if it is not your preferred preference or even your forte. If you know that your opponent has a preference for going a very fast, aggressive Ahmed in their drafts, why on earth would you try to counter it with a slow, damage-based Politis? The damage Politis, the standard way that most people might be playing it, doesn't really do anything to the skill nullifiers. No matter how much damage is on her, you're not going to do anything to the Ahmed team. After doing some research and talking to several other people, I adjusted the way that I play Politis in the current format as of the recording of this video. The way that seemed most natural to me given the metagame that I was going into.
That's a really fast poly. Oh my god, is this a genius tech? Wait, this is an insane tech actually. Are we gonna see any crown stunts as well? Oh!
In a proper metagame and community, if something like this Politis that I just showed you finds mainstream success and people adopt it, then people will adjust the way they play Ahmed or find a counter to this Politis. At this point, it becomes your job as the player to adapt yet again and find the next thing that beats this new style, the new path of least resistance. That's how metagaming works. This leads us very neatly into our next section, which is the Book of Fire. The Book of Fire, which is the longest of these books, teaches us specific strategies when it comes to swordplay, but perhaps its two most important lessons are these: seizing the initiative and the predictability of large groups of people. To quote Musashi again, it is difficult for large numbers of men to change positions, so their movements are easily predicted. An individual can easily change his mind, so he is difficult to predict. Competitive play is very much a game of laying traps and capitalizing on openings when they present themselves. This strategy is paramount in Epic 7, where drafting is a good 70 to 80% of the entire game. By pre-banning a specific character, you could potentially force an expected reaction and playstyle out of a player. By preemptively picking a hero such as Bellion, you can cut off specific options in a draft, and you might also be able to force a predictably punishable set of picks out of your opponent. By drafting a character like Teiyu that is presumed bad as of the recording of this video, you can test the opponent's understanding of the hero pool and see if they know the shortcomings of that specific hero. You can also draft something like a 260 speed Politis on Abyssal Crown instead of a standard damage one to potentially lure someone into a false sense of security. I mentioned that last one again because it is a lesson almost all of us learn really early on in Epic 7, but we really don't spend too much time thinking about it. You go into a fight and see a character and go, wow, that character is way faster than I thought. The assumption was one thing, and it turned out it was something entirely different. When you're looking to compete at the highest level, you have to understand that there is a metagame, a set standard way that most people do things. If the way that most people commonly play the game is called strategy A, and the most common way people counter strategy A is with strategy B, then as a player, you want to be on strategy C, the one that beats both strategy A and strategy B that they do not see coming. This is a pretty high-level concept, admittedly, and only really works when you start to understand the game at an incredibly high level, which again refers back to the Book of Earth and why studying and understanding everything is so important. In my How to Play videos, I teach you all the most common ways to play a character so that you can enjoy them. The thing is, though, those weren't always the most common ways to play the character. Someone somewhere had to figure that out and have success with it before it was adopted and became the common strategy. As an aspiring player, you should have a game plan for these common builds and common strategies. As a player seeking to be at the top, your goal should be to be as unpredictable as possible and to have that bleeding edge tech that no one sees coming. That strategy C that trumps not only the metagame, but the obvious counter that most of your peers are probably flocking to. We can see this in the 2022 Epic 7 World Champion, Phantom, and his account. He had a 300 speed Closer Charles when everyone else was content with just having a 280 speed one. He had a green Charles in his back pocket to overthrow tournament favorite Jintei when everyone had completely dismissed that character. Phantom also had a 300 speed Judge Kisei waiting in the wings for a specific scenario that never materialized, yet it was still another character that no one was expecting to have even geared. This is the reason why you'll often see me react positively to many new hero reveals as well as changes in balance patch adjustments. I'm looking for that untapped potential, that thing that perhaps someone else overlooked when everyone else had written it off. The person who is open-minded and doesn't easily dismiss things oftentimes has access to some very powerful weapons that they can leverage to get an advantage, to dictate the terms of engagement in a competitive game. If you haven't guessed by now, dictating the terms of engagement and being unpredictable are two very powerful tools. If you recall from the beginning of this video, we talked about Musashi's Nitten Ichiryu style and how it has him wielding two katana in an era where most people only fought using one katana. To most, his style is going to seem unpredictable and unorthodox, very disorienting for them to actually deal with the first time they come against it. They're probably not going to know what to do about it. And since the fight at that point is going to be on Musashi's terms, and his opponent doesn't really know how to counter his strategy, he can very easily press his advantage and pick up an easy W. The final two books to talk about are the Book of Wind and the Book of Void. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, the Book of Wind doesn't exactly translate well into today's competitive philosophy. It is a book that details the specific sword styles of others at the time period Musashi was alive, as well as those sword styles' failures and how each lacks a fundamental understanding of strategy when compared to his own style of Nitten Ichiryu. Basically, this thing is a guide for a metagame that we haven't really had for about 400 years. Which then leads us to the final book, the Book of Void, which can best be summarized again by a quote from Musashi at the beginning of this book. By knowing things exist, you know that which does not exist. That is the void. It's a simple philosophy. Know as much as you can. Know yourself. And by knowing these things, you know your shortcomings and what there is still left to learn and still left to improve upon. The more you know, the more you realize you don't know. You should never stop learning, and you should never stop practicing. To quote my boy Pedro, this is the way. And that is going to do it for the Book of Five Rings and how I feel it applies to Epic 7. If you've never read the Book of Five Rings by Miyamoto Musashi, I will leave a link to its Amazon page down in this video's description. It is a bit abstract and a bit of a short read, but feel free to pick it up for yourself. It's definitely been one of the most fascinating books that I've ever read in my lifetime. I think as a competitive player with my competitive mindset nowadays, I think without reading this book as well as surrounding myself with the individuals that I have throughout my lifetime, I would be a completely different person and probably would not seek or aspire to a lot of the philosophies that are talked about in this video. If there's anything you take away from this video, please let me know down in the comments below. Did you like this video? Did you hate this video? Do you want to see me do more videos in this same style, or perhaps have me talk about things like game design or game theory? Would love to know what my audience would want to hear from me on, besides just the standard how to play guides, as well as things like patch notes previews. Again, would love to hear any and all comments. As always, enjoy the rest of your day, the rest of your week, and I'll see you all tomorrow for, I believe, talking about Benimaru as well as Moonlight Keiron. Bye-bye now.